Mr. Speaker, for the last several weeks, I've had a very heavy heart. Mr. Speaker, I did a lot of prayerful reflection this weekend, and I feel called to speak on the floor these words on this day. Mr. Speaker, in a few days, this body will have the opportunity to vote on House Resolution 274, a proposed change to the rules of this august body assembled. Over the next few days, we will have an opportunity to discuss at length why this proposed change is an affront to the purpose, protocol, and precedent of this House. But today, Mr. Speaker, I want to address something the patron, the delegate from Prince William, Delegate Ayala, said on Friday. The delegate said this rules change was fundamentally a vote about the ERA. Well, that struck me, Mr. Speaker, because if this rules change is fundamentally a vote about the ERA, then naturally the question should be asked, what fundamentally is the ERA about? We already know, Mr. Speaker, that the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution applies the equal protection of the laws to all people, regardless of sex. The United States Supreme Court has said so. So if equality under the law is already protected by our Constitution, what could this additional amendment really be about, Mr. Speaker? The next few days will give us the opportunity to answer that question by saying out loud what this has been about all along: a proxy fight on unrestricted access to abortion. I think we're all well aware of the shock and outrage that emerged not only across the Commonwealth, but across the country after the details of House Bill 2491 became widely known. That legislation, Mr. Speaker, erased all meaningful restrictions on late-term abortion, allowing abortion up to the moment of birth for the most tenuous of reasons. But make no mistake, if the ERA becomes part of our Constitution, even those weak and meaningless standards would not stand up to legal scrutiny. Obviously, it goes without saying that Virginia's current law, which applies a very rigorous standard to late-term abortions and which has been in place since Roe v. Wade itself was adopted, might very well be ruled unlawful. And I remind the body that a recent poll showed an overwhelming majority of Virginians support our current standards. But that is not all, Mr. Speaker. Language that has long existed in our state budget to prohibit taxpayer funding of abortions, except where required by federal law, could be struck down by a federal court. Language in this year's House budget that limits state grants to organizations that provide non-federally qualified abortions could also be ruled unlawful. All of these very reasonable, very rational protections on life could be wiped out if the so-called ERA was adopted. Unless, Mr. Speaker, unless people think that this is just fear-mongering rhetoric from those miscreant Republicans, I would like to call the body's attention to 3 cases from across the country where restrictions on abortions were struck down due to state-level ERAs like the very amendment being pushed by some of our colleagues this year, sir. The first comes from Texas, Mr. Speaker, in 2001. A group of individuals challenged Texas's law limiting taxpayer funding of abortion to instances consistent with the federal Hyde Amendment. The Texas Supreme Court struck down that law, citing Article 1, Section 3A of the Texas Constitution, which says, in part, equality under the law shall not be denied or abridged because of sex. The second case, Mr. Speaker, comes from Connecticut in 1986. In the case of Doe v. Mayer, the Connecticut Supreme Court held that Connecticut could not adopt certain regulations limiting access to abortion because, in part, the regulations violated Article 1, Section 20 of the Connecticut Constitution, which says that no person shall be denied the equal protection of law, nor be subjected to segregation or discrimination in the exercise or enjoyment of his or her civil or political rights because of religion, race, color, ancestry, national origin, or sex. And the third case, Mr. Speaker, comes from New Mexico in 1999. In New Mexico Right to Choose Noral v. Johnson, the New Mexico Supreme Court affirmed a lower court decision that found state restrictions on taxpayer funding for abortion were unconstitutional due to Article 2, Section 18 of the New Mexico Constitution, the state's Equal Right Amendment, which reads, "Equality of rights under law shall not be denied on the account of the sex of any person." This case was particularly interesting, Mr. Speaker, because the court found that under the state's ERA, there was no compelling justification for disparate treatment of men and women when it came to medical standards under the law. In other words, because the law cannot deny a taxpayer-funded late-term abortion to a man, the law cannot deny a taxpayer-funded late-term abortion to a woman. Unfettered access to abortion on demand, early term, late term, and fully funded by taxpayers. That is what this ERA is all about, Mr. Speaker. Our colleagues may deny it. They may not even believe it. They may genuinely think that this is about the noble cause of equality. We heard on the floor, Mr. Speaker, that God made us all equal. But, sir, he didn't make us all the same. Make no mistake, and history proves that the case law and case law demonstrates that the pro-abortion lobby believes and will use the ERA as their ticket to abortion at any time, for any reason, and fully funded by taxpayers. I believe that is the road this rules change will lead us down, Mr. Speaker. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear on one thing. If this amendment before us were just about equality, and its advocates could prove that it would not do exactly what the courts have already found it does, then I would be the first person to vote for it. Because I have a wife and a daughter, and I believe they deserve the same rights and respect that all people should receive. And I believe you would not find a single dissenting vote in this House were that the case. But, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly believe that this is not what this amendment is about. And I hope the body will reject this effort to expand access to late-term, taxpayer-funded abortion. I appreciate the Speaker and the body's time.